What might cause a man to miss his lifelong best friend's funeral? Not only were Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy comedians, but they were also icons who helped to define humor. However, the public never saw the years of stress, heartache, and quiet that were hidden behind the laughing. Fans have pondered for decades why Stan never visited Hardy to bid him farewell, but the reality is much more tragic than anyone could have ever guessed. The most famous comedy duo. Even though Oliver Hardy and Stan Laurel were complete opposites, their connection transformed comedy. Tall and slender, he had a perpetually bewildered expression on his face. The other was sprightly, round, and carried himself as though he believed he had everything under control until the world told him otherwise. Together, they produced a humorous beat that would be heard for many decades. In Hollywood's heyday of comedy, they were the most identifiable pair due to their timing, chemistry, and easy chaos. However, behind the scenes, scripts, and flawless slapstick routines, they had personal struggles that weren't always visible to the audience. They initially came into contact in 1921, long before anyone could have predicted the significance of that encounter. The movie was a little silent comedy called The Lucky Dog, and it wasn't very popular. Oliver portrayed the crook, while Stan played a poor man who was robbed by a crook. They hardly ever shared moments together, and neither of them could have predicted that they would be involved in half of anything significant. In the wild early days of Hollywood, when actors hopped from short film to short film in search of a payday and perhaps some recognition, both were merely trying to make it through. The smells of sawdust and grease paint filled Stan Laurel's childhood. The stage lights drew him in from the beginning when his parents operated a theater. He became a member of the vaudeville troupe led by Fred Carnot, which made Charlie Chaplin famous. Served as Chaplin's understudy and observed intently how Chaplin created whole worlds using silence and tiny movements. The physical storytelling was a masterclass. Even though Stan was unaware of it at the time, those lessons would serve as the cornerstone of all of his subsequent creations. Stan stayed behind during the group's American tour to pursue new filmmaking chances. He never really settled on his true calling, bouncing between directing and little comedic roles. He did learn, however, about rhythm, framing, and how a single look or pause might bring a picture to life. These were the specifics that would ultimately characterize his brilliance. Even though Oliver Hardy's environment was so dissimilar, it yet brought him to the same place. Hardy began by performing in theaters before straying into vaudeville and, eventually, silent movies. A barber used to call him Babe when he was younger, and his pals adopted the nickname, which stuck. His appearance and personality were larger than life. He had already starred in hundreds of movies by the early 1920s, but not as a major star but rather as a trustworthy supporting actor who could elevate even a minor part to something special. When Laurel and Hardy were officially paired by the Hal Roach Studios for putting pants on Philip in 1927, something clicked right away. It was not fabricated or coerced. It was instinctive. The delicate, innocent awe of Laurel contrasted wonderfully with Hardy's haughty conceit. In the midst of a catastrophe, Hardy would roll his eyes, puff his chest, and attempt to remain dignified while Laurel would blink, tilt his head, and stare blankly at the camera. Their relationship wasn't a simple one. It evolved into its own language. They created an empire of laughing over the following 20 years. Each of the more than 107 films they produced together was a masterwork of physical humor. They were not dependent on conversation or short jokes. Rather, they created humor through emotion, rhythm, and timing. One of the most well-known songs in movie history is their theme tune, the Cuckoo Tune. Audiences could be alerted by a few notes that hinted at the impending turmoil and charm. Their balance, with the idiot and the irritated guy circling each other in perfect comic harmony, was praised by critics. They became well-known outside of America. They were hailed as folk heroes by audiences throughout Europe while they were on tour. Their comedy had never really dated, as evidenced by the fact that British comedians voted them the 7th best comedy act of all time in 2005, decades later. However, legends are not immune to the passage of time. By the late 1940s, the slapstick-loving world was evolving. Following the conflict, consumers yearned for fresh, contemporary forms of entertainment. The enchantment that occupied theaters began to diminish. And the fissures were evident in 1951 when Laurel and Hardy produced their last movie, A Tall K. The entire thing was an absolute disaster. The health of both men was bad. Communication between the French and Italian crews exacerbated the poor script. As a result, the movie fell short of their reputation. And for the first time, it no longer felt natural to laugh. Not because they had lost their spark, but rather because the world had changed. It signaled the end of an age. Even after the cameras stopped recording, their relationship would endure through success, sickness, and heartache. Additionally, it would result in one last unspoken choice for Stan Laurel. For decades to come, fans would be left wondering. The personal struggles of Stan. Despite making the world laugh, Stan Laurel's personal life was frequently a chaotic mess that he was powerless to manage. Outside of the cameras, he was a guy enmeshed in complex relationships, preoccupied by his profession, and motivated by a demand for perfection that hardly allowed him to relax. His heart was frequently where his problems started. Stan's romantic life began with a string of promising beginnings but soon descended into public unrest. Despite having only 4 wives, 2 of whom were married to him twice, he was married 5 times. The patterned passion, miscommunication, and collapse was almost dramatic, reoccurring like scenes from one of his own comedies. Prior to being recognized by Hollywood as half of Laurel and Hardy, Stan's first significant relationship was with Australian actress and performer May Dahlberg. She was his partner for a period, both on and off stage, when they first met while working in vaudeville. May exhibited audacity, unpredictability, and frequent jealousy of Stan's rising stardom. She said that she came up with the name Stan Laurel and persuaded him to drop Arthur Jefferson, his given name, since it sounded more appropriate for the entertainment industry. Both the term and the tension persisted. Soon, Stan's career was hampered by May's presence. She had a tendency to interfere with his work life by criticizing directors, interfering with rehearsals, and causing awkward situations on set. She was viewed by the Hal Roach Studios executives as a burden, and her reputation started to limit Stan's options. By 1925, tensions had reached a point where producer Joe Rock made an extraordinary proposition. According to reports, he promised to settle with May, some estimate it as up to $10,000, if she would leave Stan and permanently leave the country. She agreed, and Stan was able to breathe for the first time in years. However, that type of conclusion does not remove the emotional damage it causes. His subsequent marriages also failed to provide him peace. In 1926, Stan wed actress Lois Nielsen, and their marriage appeared secure for a while. They were separated by celebrity and lengthy work hours, but they had 2 kids. Stan married Virginia Ruth Rogers after their divorce, then divorced her again before being married to Russian opera diva Vera Shuvalova and then getting back together with Ruth. It was a whirlpool of love, remorse, and atonement attempts. He was neither cold nor aloof. He was merely restless, constantly looking for a peace that he was unable to find. Stan appeared to have a genuine marriage to his business, even in his most intimate moments. Oliver Hardy took a more laid-back attitude to filmmaking, letting directors and scripts do their share of the work, while Stan was unable to relinquish control. He was the creative force behind the pair, often going uncredited as either the director or the writer. At Hal Roach Studios, however, everyone was aware of the people influencing the movies. He revised scripts, rewrote scenes, wrote quips, and was always thinking of new ways to make things a bit sharper, a bit funnier, and a bit more flawless. His belief that a single wrong pause may destroy a whole joke led to accounts of his spending hours in the editing room tweaking timing by fractions of a second. He would practice continuously, and if a scenario didn't feel right, he would trash it, according to colleagues. Stan believed that humor was about architecture, not chance or whimsy. Every drop, look, and pause was planned with accuracy. Laurel and Hardy's ageless appeal was partly due to their perfectionism, but it came at a price. He was burdened by the responsibilities. Stan took the job home, while Hardy could go to a party or golf course to relax. He was always drawing things. He would call editors late at night or rewrite lines to fix something that had been troubling him. The pressure to maintain that level of renown only increased when the pair's notoriety peaked. Stan took the idea that audiences will always seek perfection personally. His health started to suffer as a result of the tension. He got diabetes, and by the 1940s, cardiac issues were slowing him down. He refused to back down despite the toll that long hours and emotional strain inflicted. He had become inextricably linked to his work. Despite his inability to perform, he continued to write notes and sketches for unfinished films. His once uplifting fame gradually became a burden. Comedy, the foundation of his existence, was no longer the focus of Hollywood's transformation. The plotting, deliberate humor of the Laurel and Hardy period seemed outdated to younger audiences due to sound movies, new styles, and faster pacing. Stan was devastated that something he had worked so hard to create and was so precious to him was disappearing. Every accomplishment felt fleeting, and every setback felt personal. He laughed uncontrollably, but as the laughing subsided, he was left in a state of stillness that few could comprehend. And the strain, sorrow, and quiet that lay beneath would soon pave the way for some of the most talked about scenes in comic history. The disputes involving the pair. Oliver Hardy and Stan Laurel were the most popular pair of idiots in the world because of their fame. They presented a neat mess on camera, but reality off-screen was much more convoluted. Even their closest friends attempted to overlook the gossip, poor choices, and emotional fissures that lurked beneath the elegance and charm. In particular, Stan Laurel had always taken his craft more seriously than the other. But occasionally, such focus seeped into his private life, where it was frequently difficult to distinguish between exaggeration and truth in gossip. Through the years, rumors of his drinking started to circulate. Some co-workers claimed that he was depressed, particularly when his work slowed down or his relationship soured. Suddenly, the man who was renowned for creating flawless scenarios on set was unable to edit the chaos in his own life. He reportedly distanced himself from friends, consuming alcohol to reduce the stress associated with both success and failure. His precarious health was exacerbated by the strain of perpetual reinvention. Insider accounts portrayed a guy divided between dread of becoming irrelevant and pride in his legacy. They had said he was hard to work with, even in his best days. He was perceived by some at Hal Roach Studios as being overly domineering and untrusting of others' opinions. He insisted on being in charge of all the details, including the lighting, props, screenplays, and even the costumes. Some people did not share Stan's view of humor as a precise art form. Hardy's perfectionism was said to have alienated crew workers and occasionally tried his tolerance. It seemed to others like dictatorship masquerading as devotion. The life of Oliver Hardy has its share of difficulties. Even if he managed to conceal them successfully under his friendly smile, they frequently made news. Every one of his 3 marriages seemed to end in heartbreak. Myrtle Reeves, his second wife, reportedly battled alcoholism, which caused their marriage to become more erratic. 2 friends related arguments that left them exhausted. Despite his kindness and ability to forgive quickly, Hardy frequently found himself locked in vicious cycles of guilt and resentment. The tumult at home was a sharp contrast to his serene on-screen persona. Financial difficulties also followed him. He had a reputation for being extravagant and supporting people. His disregard for money, however, resulted in ongoing tax issues. Actors without business acumen were not treated well in the 1930s and 1940s, and Hardy trusted individuals who didn't always have his best interests in mind. He owed the government a lot of money at one point, and in order to make ends meet at certain periods, he had to take on less prominent or lesser jobs. Although he didn't often complain about it, it drained him. In spite of these difficulties, the public still viewed them as the same 2 endearing characters they portrayed on TV. Their shared identity had become their characters' innocence. They represented companionship and pure happiness to millions of admirers, who saw them as more than just performers. Because of how powerful that image was, few people could comprehend the reality of 2 elderly comedians battling health issues, creative blockages, and the gradual decline of their notoriety. Audiences didn't want to believe rumors that they were at odds when they started to spread. They had developed a believable chemistry that made confrontation seem unthinkable. However, there was never a steady concord in their partnership. They couldn't agree on direction, screenplays, or who should have the last say. At times, Hardy's laid-back demeanor contrasted with Stan's passion. They hardly talked in between scenes at times, reserving their exchanges for the cameras when it was required by professionalism. Nevertheless, the love that lay behind the stress never entirely vanished. Their friendship was not the only aspect of their relationship that the public found fascinating. Over time, some people conjectured that their intimacy might have been more profound. Together, they had traveled, worked, and relied on one another more than anybody else for decades. They seemed inseparable, frequently stayed together in hotel rooms while on tour, and completed each other's sentences. For viewers, it appeared to be a collaboration that went beyond friendship. There was never any concrete proof to back up the rumors that there was a romantic component. For most who knew them, it was an emotional bond forged over years of common hardship, a brotherhood. Nevertheless, rumors persisted, possibly because their on-screen connection was so organic that viewers couldn't picture it being strictly professional. Managing those boundaries between their private lives and public personas became more difficult as they grew older. Each man was battling his own issues. Stan's health and restlessness, and Hardy's health, financial situation, and emotional exhaustion. When they were together, however, they maintained appearances. They posed for pictures, conducted courteous interviews, and made an effort to maintain the appearance that audiences recognized Laurel and Hardy. And as time went on, Hardy's hardships would soon become more severe, inflicting a burden that no amount of humor could cover up. Hardy's terrible downfall. The demise of Oliver Hardy was one of those Hollywood tales that seemed too harsh for a man who had dedicated his life to making people laugh. Slowly but surely, the world's familiar image of the round, self-assured guy with a bowler hat and a gleam of self-importance started to give way to a frail version of himself that few saw. He started to suffer from bad habits, years of physical strain, and the effects of performing all the time. It was devastating to see how he changed. Hardy's weight had always been a component of his persona on television. The main source of their humor was the disparity in size between him and Stan Laurel. The heavyset, arrogant man was attempting to keep everything under control as his tiny, awkward sidekick wrecked everything in his path. Off camera, though, that weight was a constant burden. He was dangerously large by the 1940s. He reportedly weighed more than 300 pounds, and the physical strain of touring, performing, and filming had begun to wear him down. What viewers saw as charming roundness was actually a potential health hazard. Hardy had a minor heart attack in 1954. Although it wasn't instantly lethal, it made him face his health, the one thing he had neglected for decades. The scare forced him to alter drastically. Determined to recover control, he started a strict diet as directed by his doctor. He shed about 150 pounds over the course of the following few months, undergoing such a drastic change that friends hardly recognized him. Fans were in disbelief when he made a public comeback. There was no longer the recognizable spherical form that represented half of the most popular comedy combo in the world. His clothes hung loosely, his face had become emaciated, and his once happy expression had become spectral. There were tabloids who conjectured that he was dying of cancer. Others pondered whether he had a mystery sickness of some kind. There was a subtle melancholy about Hardy, as if he realized that the public no longer recognized the man they once loved, but only a ghost of him, even if he never openly addressed the rumors. Unfortunately, the damage he had already sustained was not greatly mitigated by his substantial weight loss. His heart and lungs were severely damaged by years of excessive smoking and bad diet. Throughout his life, he had smoked, frequently in between takes or during breaks on film sets. The culture of the day included cigarette smoke throughout the sets, studios, and even the dressing rooms. For Hardy, however, it turned into an unbreakable habit. After years of stress, his body was already having trouble recovering when doctors alerted him to the implications. Due to a combination of cardiac problems, weakening lungs, and fatigue, he became more and more immobile. The man who used to chase Laurel downstairs and over rooftops on camera now walked with a limp. Film offers dwindled, in part because viewers preferred to remember him for who he was rather than who he had become. He refused to make public appearances, preferring to live in seclusion with his wife, Lucille, who gave him loving attention in his latter years. Tragedy struck once more in 1956. After a severe stroke, Hardy became paralyzed and lost his ability to talk. It was a harsh turn of events for someone whose entire existence had been centered around timing, expressiveness, and performance. Stan Laurel wrote and called frequently when he was bedridden, but Hardy was allegedly too frail to reply. Only quiet remained of their relationship, which had sustained them through decades of suffering and happiness. Following the stroke, Hardy's public existence came to an end. He would never again work, appear in front of a camera, or share the screen with Laurel as he had done so many times in the past. He experienced 2 further strokes in close succession in August 1957. His body was unable to sustain the harm any longer. At the age of 65, Oliver Norville Hardy died of cerebral thrombosis on August 7, 1957. When word of his passing spread, there was an instant response. From all around Hollywood, Europe, and beyond, tributes flooded in. Having grown up watching him, comedians, actors, and filmmakers praised his warmth and flawless timing. According to newspapers, he was a kind giant who performed with humor derived from compassion rather than cruelty. Laurel and Hardy fans who had been with them since the beginning lamented their loss as though they had lost a friend. Theaters all around the world screened repeats of their movies, and viewers once more burst out laughing as they recalled the happiness he had given them. More than just a man's death, Hardy's passing signified the end of an era. Slapstick's heyday had already passed, but Hardy's passing looked to bring an end to that more straightforward comic genre. His absence created a void that even Stan Laurel was unable to fill. In the weeks following Hardy's death, fans eagerly anticipated seeing the man who had been in almost every picture of his life. However, on the day of the funeral, an unforeseen event occurred that stunned everyone. Why Stan wasn't there? Valhalla Memorial Park in North Hollywood hosted Oliver Hardy's funeral on a sunny August day in 1957. It was a low-key ceremony, reverent, silent, and full of old faces. Friends, family, and former co-workers came together to bid farewell to the man who had been a half-partner in one of the greatest collaborations in cinema. In the hopes of capturing the one picture that everyone would see, photographers waited outside. Standing next to his lifelong buddy for the final time is Stan Laurel. But he never showed up. His assigned seat was still vacant. And for many people, that absence became just as much of a topic of conversation as the burial. The reality was much more painful than it seemed. Stan himself was in poor condition by the time Hardy passed away. He was weak from years of heart problems, diabetes, and weariness. He was composing letters, recuperating from the psychological and physical strain of his work, and living in peace in Santa Monica. Hardy was more affected than anyone could have imagined when he learned of his passing. Upon hearing that, he was profoundly shocked, according to later insider claims. Not only was the loss personal, but it also felt like a part of who he was had been stolen. The decision to attend the funeral wasn't an easy one. In fact, Stan's physician strongly discouraged him from doing so, stating that the physical and emotional stress could lead to another collapse. His body was unable to cope with the stress and the journey. He realized he couldn't have endured the service even if he had disregarded the warning. Babe would understand, he responded simply when questioned about his choice. For decades, Stan had gone by Hardy's nickname, Babe. Even in private communications, he called him by such name. That brief statement encapsulated the breadth of their bond. Stan also knew the ins and outs of public appearances, particularly for such high-profile individuals. He understood that if he appeared weak and obviously upset, the media would focus their attention on him rather than Hardy. Instead of being about the guy being buried, the funeral would become a show about the survivor. He had no desire for that. The day was Hardy's and any diversions. A love-born one would have felt wrong, too. But his absence was easily misinterpreted. There were rumors in the newspapers at the time that there had been a rift between the two men. Some said their partnership had ended on a sour note or that they had fallen out before to Hardy's illness. Others speculated that Stan might not have been able to face his friend's burial because of pride or shame. Fans expressed their confusion and disappointment in letters to periodicals. The idea that one of the inseparable couple wouldn't be present to bid the other farewell was nearly unthinkable to those who had grown up seeing them falter and recover together on film. However, the reality was known by those closest to them. In private discussions and subsequent interviews, Laurel was adamant that there had been no argument or lingering animosity. Until the very end, their friendship had remained strong. In truth, Stan had frequently contacted Lucille Hardy during the last months of Hardy's life, requesting updates and sending consoling letters. He got condolence notes from colleagues and admirers worldwide following the funeral, but he mostly kept quiet about his loss. Reporters hounded him, and all he would say was that he had lost his best buddy. He kept writing jokes, short skits, and ideas even while he was confined to his house due to illness. Many of these still had Hardy's name next to his own. He appeared incapable of conceiving without him. Hardy's character was always waiting just off-screen, waiting for the signal that would never come, and every unfinished concept seemed to end in the same way. Following Hardy's passing, Stan Laurel discreetly stepped back from the spotlight. In the absence of his spouse, the stage, which had been his second home, lost its significance. He turned down every opportunity that was presented to him and never performed again. He believed that Laurel and Hardy were one and that they couldn't exist as one entity. Rather, he lived out his last years surrounded by professional souvenirs, pictures, letters, and screenplays from movies that had shaped a certain age. He was still writing after retiring. He had a desk full with doodles and incomplete scripts, all of which had his trademark simplicity and timing. He didn't intend to do them, though. His simple ritual of writing allowed him to maintain his connection to the art that had given him meaning. He also responded to fan mail with diligence, occasionally writing lengthy, reflective letters to fans who had grown up laughing at his work. His warmth and humility, always willing to share stories about Hardy and their years together, frequently astonished visitors. He received an honorary award from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in 1961 for his work in comedy movies. Even though the recognition impacted him greatly, he chose not to attend the celebration. He wanted to avoid the limelight, as he did during his later years. Stan Laurel passed away from a heart attack in 1965 at the age of 74, leaving a legacy that still influences humor today. He is remembered as a devoted buddy who never stopped joking with the person he lost, in addition to being a pioneer. How do you feel? Was Stan's absence more than that? Please leave your responses in the space provided below. Please remember to click like on the next video that appears on your screen and subscribe to our channel for future updates if you like this one.